Well, the prospects for the Democrats continue to sink and sink. The day before the election, according to 538, they're calling it a dead heat for the Senate. It's not quite a dead heat for the Senate. They've run 100 scenarios. In 54 of those scenarios, the Republicans win. There is a not insignificant possibility that Republicans win significantly more than 50 seats, that they end up with maybe 54 seats. You start getting outside that range and it becomes very, very speculative, but it's certainly possible they win all the way up to 54 seats. Now, again, that does not mean that Republicans are guaranteed to win the seats. What it does mean is that Republicans have the upper hand, according to 538, in a wide variety of states. And in those states, it looks as though the Republicans are going to win, or at least have a very solid shot at winning. A new Wall Street Journal poll also suggests that the GOP has been picking up a larger share of black voters than in other recent elections. They've also improved their standing in the past few months among Latino voters. About 17% of black voters said they would pick a Republican candidate for Congress over a Democrat in Journal polls both in late October and in August. That is a substantially larger share than the 8% of black voters who voted for President Trump in 2020 and the 8% who backed GOP candidates in 2018. That's more than double, in fact. Meanwhile, among Latino voters, Democrats held a lead of only 5 percentage points over Republicans in the choice of congressional candidate. Latino voters in 2020 favored Biden over Trump by 28 percentage points. In 2018, they favored Democrats by 31 percentage points. So since 2018, that is a 26-point shift in favor of the Republicans. These are disastrous numbers for Democrats. It means that the demographic coalition argument that Democrats have been making for 2 decades is not only wrong, it is dramatically wrong. If Republicans start cutting into the Democratic base to the tune of 20% of black voters and 50% of Hispanic voters, Democrats do not have a coalition. The coalition simply does not exist. And one of the reasons the coalition doesn't exist is because Democrats simply have not delivered on any of their promises. The only promises they've delivered on are turning equity into the center of all policy at the White House level, suggesting that equal outcome is significantly more important than equal opportunity or equality of rights. Most people don't like that stuff. And they've also delivered on their promise that they are going to push in very socially radical directions, which, again, most Americans are not in favor of. Meanwhile, the bread and butter issues they've completely failed on. According to the Wall Street Journal, elevated and persistent inflation is among the greatest near-term risks to the U.S. economy and financial system, according to the Federal Reserve over the weekend. They also warned about rising friction in trading of U.S. government debt. Fed Vice Chairwoman Lael Brainerd said on Friday there's a risk an unexpected shock could amplify existing vulnerabilities in the financial system. In a statement accompanying the release of the central bank's latest report on financial stability, quote, "It's important to remain attentive to the risks raised in the report and to work with domestic and international regulators to support the resilience of the financial system." So in other words, we could have inflation to the extent there's an actual meltdown in some of the financial systems globally. The Fed and other central banks have been raising interest rates at the fastest pace in more than 4 decades to beat back inflation by slowing economic growth. Right now, economists are estimating there will be a recession next year. It is likely that recession could be quite deep and it could be quite long. So all of this is a disaster area for the Democrats going into a midterm, let alone a presidential in 2024. All of this is starting to have its first effects in the immediate economy, not just in terms of inflation, but in terms of people's actual decision-making. So according to the Wall Street Journal, many shoppers are now trading down to less expensive clothing and accessories. They've been swapping Lululemon leggings for Uniqlo and expensive lingerie for Target bras and panties as inflation eats into their disposable income and a rocky stock market erodes their wealth. So people are downshifting their splurge this year. So the interest rate increases are having their predictable effect. People feel like they are running out of money thanks to inflation, and they are starting to spend less money. Meanwhile, layoffs have begun at a bunch of companies that are most vulnerable to the volatile markets. So Meta, which has been dramatically misrun in terms of moving away from core business, which was Facebook, and toward the metaverse. And it's something that Mark Zuckerberg has wanted to focus on. Maybe as a long-term play it works. In the short term, it certainly is not. Their stock is down 80% this year. Meta is now planning large-scale layoffs this week, according to people familiar with the matter, in what could be the largest round in a recent spate of tech job cuts after the industry's rapid growth during the pandemic. So there was a massive inflation in the tech industry, thanks to everybody staying home and being on the computer full time. But also thanks to the vast amounts of speculative money that were blown into the pockets of investors. People were putting that into tech because that's where the high payoffs were. Well, now they're looking at mass layoffs over at Facebook. All of this amounts to a really, really bad closing for the Democrats. So this means that the Democratic closing argument is going to have to be entirely Trump. It was always going to be Trump, but now it really has to be Trump. Maybe they could have trumpeted their own accomplishments if they had any. They don't. And so their closing argument is going to be that if Republicans take back the House, and then if Republicans take back the Senate, and then if they take back the presidency in 2024, and if Trump is the actual nominee in 2024, then we are going to revert back 50 years. It's going to be a tyrannical, fascistic state here in the United States. Now, they're not really trotting out Joe Biden to make this case because Joe Biden is really, really bad at this. So they've been trotting out Barack Obama, who, by the way, is also not great at stumping for his own base. Barack Obama was great at getting Barack Obama elected. He was terrible at getting anybody else elected. Over the course of his presidency, something like 1,100 state, local, and federal offices in the Democratic Party were lost because he was so bad at helping people in his own party. But you got to go with what you got to go with. So Barack Obama was out there stumping for John Fetterwoman. And his closing argument is that if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, they're going to set the country back 50 years. Now, I would take this a little more seriously if he hadn't said this about Mitt Romney. He literally said this about Mitt Romney. It was that he was going to take us back to the 80s in terms of foreign policies and the 50s in terms of social policy. Now he's saying the same about, like, you can't keep playing the same tune over and over without it becoming Muzak. And when Democrats keep saying over and over, you're going to bring us back to the 50s, you're going to bring us back 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, 2,000 years. When you say this kind of stuff over and over again, whatever the melody is, it just starts to sound like background noise. It's just elevator music at this point. So here's some elevator music from the former president.
So I think somebody mentioned earlier, we're setting our clocks back tomorrow by an hour. On Tuesday, let's make sure our country doesn't get set back 50 years.
I love it when people think they have a laugh line and their line is garbage, but they're very enthused by their own laugh. Let's make sure it's not 50 years. Solid stuff there from the president. I also was amused by Barack Obama trying to make excuses for the Democrats' bad crime record by saying, everybody's saying that crime is going up. Well, not just over the last 2 years. There's been a more significant rise in crime over a longer period. Here he is explaining there is one problem with this argument.
There's a lot of talk about crime right now. Violent crime has gone up. But, it went up over the last 7 years, not just the last 2. They don't talk about the previous guy. It's gone up in conservative rural places, not just cities.
Now, I do know a little bit about crime statistics. I know even more about basic math, like really, really basic math. I'm not an engineer. 2022 minus 7 is 2015. Who was the president in 2015? Quick quiz. Who's the president? It was the guy who was just talking right now about how crime started going up 7 years ago. That guy. Yes, crime started going up under you. No one ever talks about the previous guy. Don't talk about the guy before him. That guy, we're not going to talk about him. Thank you, Mr. President. That's solid stuff. Meanwhile, Joe Biden they did actually trot him out, but they've been trotting him out in sort of random places. So they trotted him out in Philadelphia for like half a second, like a hot half second. They've actually been trotting him out in places like his closing days are going to be in heavily Democrat districts. It's really, really funny. Like they're actually trotting him out in Bowie, Maryland and Ashburn, Virginia. The Maryland governor's race and a Northern Virginia House seat. Those districts, by the way, those areas are D+20. They don't want Joe Biden anywhere near an actual competitive race in the final day of the election. They don't want him anywhere near that. They're going to stock that dude in a D+80 district because at least he can't lose him that. I mean, he's losing him everything else. Anyway, Joe Biden's closing argument is that the election is a choice between darkness and light and mashed potatoes.
But really, Democrats up and down the ballot, we need to elect them all. We need it badly. Pennsylvania, this isn't a referendum this year. It's a choice between two vastly different visions of America.
So what are those different visions of America? One is the one where you trans the kids, and the other one is one where you don't trans. So there's that one, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking, isn't your father's Republican Party, or your grandfather's, or your great-great-grandfather's, or even Methuselah? I remember. Yeah. So his pitch is the same as Barack Obama's. It's a brand new Republican Party, but it's an evil Republican Party. The old Republican Party was good, but not the one before that. That one was super bad. The new one is going to be like the really, really old one. Here's this confused pitch. I like the guy in the background who's so bored that he's like playing on his phone.
It's a fundamental shift compared to the Oz and the mega Republican trickle-down economics. Oh, really? This ain't your father's Republican Party. This is a different breed of cat.
It's a different breed of cat. It's like a Siamese cat, but not like a striped Siamese cat. Like a different kind of Siamese cat. It's the kind of cat it's not a pussy cat. It's a boy cat. This is their. So the media are trying to make the case for Biden because Biden can't make the case for himself. Again, people literally in the background of his shot are just playing with their phones as he talks because no one knows what the hell he's talking about. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing right now. You're not going to want to miss it. We will be getting into the media, which is already pre-criminating the loss of Tiffany Cross over at MSNBC. A sad day for us all. Plus, Joe Biden finally putting some pressure on Ukraine to negotiate. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.